So how many of you were mountains people? Okay, ocean, beach people? You notice I didn't give an option there of how many of y'all are desert people. You know, we've had these images during the songs that are of this barren landscape, desert, dry. And part of that is to kind of get our mind thinking about maybe the story that we will come to here in the book of Exodus in just a minute. Because the people of Israel found themselves, you could say, on a beach, but it wasn't for a vacation. They weren't there because they thought it would be a nice place to go and kick their feet back and sit under an umbrella and slather themselves with sunscreen and tell the kids to be careful, don't go out in the deep water. They found themselves in very different circumstances. And last week, we were in Exodus also, and the biblical story in Exodus last week was the call of Moses. It was that point where he is tending the flocks of Jethro, which I just love that there's a man named Jethro in the Bible. He was obviously from southern Israel. He was tending the flocks of Jethro, and it says way out beyond the wilderness is where he was. And then we know the story that God appeared to him in a burning bush and told him, Moses, I want you to go, and I want you to do something amazing for me. And Moses protested some. God, you've got the wrong guy. I'm not the guy for this job. And God said, I want you to go, and I'll be with you, and I'll send people with you, and I will equip you, and I will provision you, and I will lead you, and I will guide you. That's where we were last week. Well, this week, we're still in the story of Moses, but you've got to fast forward a long way down the road of his life, because where we come to this morning is a point in Moses' life where he has been faithful in following God at that burning bush. He left that place, and he went and he did what God had asked him to do. And he had brought the people out from under Pharaoh's hand. Pharaoh had even sent them out. Go, yes, please go away. If it means all of these plagues can go away, get out of here. And so Moses and the people flee. And if you know the story, you know they are fleeing and they didn't have the benefit of Google Maps. And so they get to a point where they see there's a great body of water in front of them. And Pharaoh had changed his mind and had said, you know what? If I sent them away, all of our hired labor just walked out the back door. Oops. And so we approach the story this morning as the people stand on the beach, if you will, but not there by choice. This is the 14th chapter of Exodus, beginning with the 19th verse. It says this. The angel of God who was going before the Israelite army moved and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud moved from in front of them and took its place behind them. It came between the army of Egypt and the army of Israel, and so the cloud was there with the darkness, and it lit up the night. One did not come near the other all night, so God is protecting them. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. The Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night and turned the sea into dry land, and the waters were divided. The Israelites went into the sea on dry ground, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left. The Egyptians pursued and went into the sea after them, all of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and chariot drivers. At the morning watch, the Lord in the pillar of fire and cloud looked down upon the Egyptian army and threw the Egyptian army into panic. He clogged their chariot wheels so that they turned with difficulty. The Egyptians said, "Let us flee from the Israelites, for the Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, so that the water may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots and chariot drivers." So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at dawn the sea returned to its normal depth. As the Egyptians fled before it, the Lord tossed the Egyptians into the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the chariot drivers, the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed them into the sea. Not one of them remained. But the Israelites walked on dry ground through the sea, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Israel saw the great work that the Lord did against the Egyptians. So the people feared the Lord and believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. I need to be very clear. There are things that I cannot explain. And I imagine there are things that you cannot explain. I don't have really the slightest idea what that burning bush looked like that was not consumed. I don't know the sound of the voice that echoed in Moses' ears that day. You come to this part of the story. I don't know what really happened there at the sea. Over the years, I've read all sorts of theories that have tried to describe it or explain it away. I've read scientific illustrations of how it was feasible for the seas to part or how it was not feasible. And I'm still really no clearer to this day on what and how it actually happened than I ever have been. But that's part of the point, maybe, is that sometimes stories that we read in the Bible shift from a place of just historical story to a story of faith. I'm reading a book right now by the theologian N.T. Wright, and part of what he is talking about is that just because there are different ways of seeing or understanding something or explaining something, and just because there's not agreement on exactly what happened or how it happened, doesn't mean that nothing happened. We see it all the time in courts of law, don't we? Disagreement on what happened or how it happened or the sequence of how it happened, but that doesn't mean that nothing happened. So I believe there by the seashore that day, something incredible happened. And I can't explain it. Maybe you can't explain it, but that's where it shifts to a faith story. Part of what I can explain is that it teaches us and shows us about the provision of God. The way that God does take care of those who are faithful in following Him. And sometimes it all depends on what we see in front of us. That question, what do you see, is something that maybe we could all do well to ask ourselves today. I don't know what all's going on in your life or in your lives, but maybe there are situations that you find yourself in where you look ahead of you and you think, I don't even know what I see. I don't have clarity on what I see. I don't know the next step forward. I don't know what I should do. I interpret what I see and maybe it's wrong. And so I want to play with that idea, if you will, let me for just a minute. The idea of what do you see? Because sometimes there can be things all along that we just miss. What do you see? Y'all can see that. How many of y'all don't see words? Anybody? A few of you? If you kind of let your eyes get lazy a little bit, you might be able to see the words hide and seek in there. So that one's kind of easy. But do y'all remember those things that, I guess it was probably in the 90s, there were stores in the mall that would have these poster-sized prints that were all these tiny images, but if you backed away from them about 8 to 10 feet and sort of stared at the middle and let your vision kind of get lazy, you could see these three-dimensional images. Do you remember those? I remember I saw one that was a dolphin like jumping through a hoop. The great part about that, there were some people, you'd be at the mall with my friends and one of us would see it and the rest of us just never would. And you'd walk through the mall and you'd have like 4 people standing outside a store just because some people just could never see it even though it was right there. So I'm going to play with this a little more. I got a little video. I saw this and this just kind of blew my mind a little bit because it's like when you first see that, all those balls are spinning, right, as they go in a circle. Is that true? It's right there in front of, it sure looked like all those balls were tracing a circle, didn't it? Some of y'all who are engineers immediately were like, no, that's clearly not what's happening. But then it just keeps demonstrating something right there before our eyes. And if you follow that all the way through, it's all the balls doing the same thing. They're all just going in a straight line, back and forth, back and forth. It's there all along, right? But maybe you don't have eyes to see it. So a lot of us are probably taking vacations this summer. In July, our family are going out west and going to experience the beauty of Yosemite and some national park stuff out that way, and I can't wait. I love nature and being out and hiking, and so I've got a couple of pictures of nature I want to show you. Not of our trip, but the first one looks like this. Man, just a cliffside. How many of y'all see a person? They're there. A few of y'all, okay. Go ahead, and there she is. Do you see her? Isn't that amazing? There all along. Some of y'all are still kind of like, even though it's blocked down there, I still don't see her. Okay, well, there you go. There all along. Just not having eyes to see what's there. So another one that I just think, a beautiful kind of, golly, what a beautiful stream flowing down off the hillside there. Y'all see the person? Front left. There all along, just maybe not having eyes to see what's there. And so part of an idea that I come to this morning with the story of Moses and the people of Israel and the exodus from Egypt and standing there at the seashore is that sometimes what we see is not all that there is. Sometimes we assume too much. Sometimes we think we know more than we do. Sometimes there is something there all along that we just can't see. If you went back a few verses prior to what we read this morning, you would see God talking to Moses and telling him, tell the Israel, and think about this for a second. Paint the picture. You're one of the people of Israel brought out from Egypt, fleeing for your life, but also to freedom, and you're excited and all going well, but then you look behind you and you see chariots of Egyptians soon to overtake you. You keep going, and now you get to a body of water that you can't pass. So a few verses prior, God is talking to Moses, and God says, tell the people of Israel, go forward. Think about that for a second. If you're Moses, go forward where? Are you kidding? Go forward? There's nowhere to go forward. How do you expect us to go forward? All that I see is churning water. Go forward? You've got to be kidding. There's literally no way to go forward. We can't. And if you go back even a few verses prior to that, verses 10, 11, and 12, the people are complaining to Moses, basically saying, and I'm putting it in my own words, basically saying, Moses, this is real cool. You've brought us out here so that we can now die humiliated in the desert. Well done. At least in Egypt, we had food to eat and water to drink. Way to go, Moses. A way forward? Into the ocean? Into the sea? Yeah, Moses, how's that going to work? Thanks. And God says, go forward. They were hemmed in. There was no good way forward. Tactically speaking, Egypt had them right where they wanted them. Hemmed in. Nowhere to escape. No way to go. And yet God says, go forward. Now, here's something in the story that I'd never really considered before. The sea is a neutral player in this, isn't it? The sea is not personified. The sea is not angry. The sea has a part to play, but it's neutral. Sometimes when we see a situation where we think there's no way out, around, or through, we think everything and everyone might be out to get us. The world is against me. Have you ever had a season in life where you felt that, or a day or an hour in your life? We have a mantra in our house, it can't just be easy. Where it's like you have those periods where it's kind of like, good grief, that went wrong. Of course it did. And then I tried to fix this and I made it worse. Of course I did. And we tried to do this at work and it failed. Of course it did. And now we're arguing with each other at home because of course we are. And we had a vacation planned and it rained because of course it did. Where it seems like everything is out to get you. But the sea is neutral in this. And I love that because the way that God rescues them is he takes the neutral player, the neutral character, and transforms it. Egypt are the pursuers, they're the aggressors. God takes the neutral character, the sea, and makes a way. Are there places in your life in those situations that are neutral? And do you have enough wherewithal to step back and say, what are the neutral things in this? And is it possible that God could use those things that don't seem like there's a way to create a way and to deliver you through something to the other side when there just didn't seem like there was a way? Well, okay, that's big Moses story, right? Capital M, huge character in the Bible, hero of faith. I got to thinking about this, and if you'll let me share for a few minutes, I wanted to share a little bit about my own story that at the time very much felt like there's no way. This is crazy. God, you've asked for something, and I don't know that you can deliver, and I'm confused, and I'm not sure where this is going. And so I want to kind of walk you through that process. The year was 2003. And I'll be brief with this front part of it because it was basically God calling me into this kind of ministry, ordained ministry, go to seminary, go through this process, be appointed to churches as a pastor. And I'd always said, nope, don't want to do that. I was working as a youth pastor at the time, thought that was what I just needed to be for a long time. I was a youth pastor. Erica, my wife, was a social worker. Ian, our son, was a toddler. Social worker, youth pastor. Man, we were living high. I mean, that is a way to, we had 3 vacation homes and youth pastor and social worker, okay? So you get the financial picture there, right? With a toddler at home. We had purchased our first home. Let's be honest, we hadn't purchased it. We had agreed to pay the bank for a really long time for it, but we had bought our first home, and that was pretty exciting. But I slowly, in my work, even there at the church, I became just kind of unsettled, not clear that I was on the path that God wanted for me. And so lots of fasting, praying, trying to figure out what's the next move. And one day in the midst of that could take you to the spot on the road where I finally prayed the prayer, allowed myself to ask, God, do you want me to go this route and be ordained in an REV, Reverend Pastor? Holy cow. Knowing what all that meant, I let myself pray that prayer. And what I interpreted, the response from God sounded a lot like what Moses heard. Yes, go forward. I think I probably asked God the question, hoping he would say, oh, of course not. No, you got it all wrong. Instead, I heard, yes, go forward. And I started doing what the people of Israel did. To use the imagery of Exodus, I looked at the road in front of me if I was going to do that and say, there's only churning seas. There's no path, God. That makes no sense for me to follow you in that. I can't. Where? How? I started saying things like, well, God, go forward. How are we going to pay for this? 3 years, graduate program, grad school ain't cheap. How are we going to pay for this? God, we can't go forward. He said, go forward. But seminary takes 3 years full time. God, what am I going to do about a job? We got a kid to raise. He said, go forward. But we've just started to figure out a routine with both of us working, and Erica's back to work, and like toddler, and all that kind of stuff. And we've just kind of hit our stride. What about, that's going to get all out of whack? And God said, I know, go forward. I remember saying to Erica one day, I don't really know how this is going to shake out, but I know that I can't not go forward. I don't know what's going to be on the other side, but I can't not take this step. And so we started taking those steps. I can't believe that the God who called us to this wouldn't then provide for us. And so with fear and trepidation, I started to say yes and to take one baby step forward and one baby step forward. Now let me unroll the rest of that story as quickly as I can. Within days, I had to have everything necessary. This was in like February. I had to have everything to Emory to enroll in seminary there. And this was before you could just call your buddy that lives somewhere to give you a letter of recommendation and they could do a PDF. You couldn't call your college and get them to send. Things had to be done through the mail still. So started working through all that process, and like 10 days later, I was accepted. They had received all the letters. What? People actually did what they said they would do? We had gotten in touch with my undergrad. They had gotten the transcripts there. Oh, and by the way, do you remember my first thing was like, how are we going to pay for this? I got a letter shortly thereafter that said, well, congratulations, you're admitted to Candler School of Theology, and you've also been gifted the Sherman Scholarship, which will pay for tuition. All of it. For 3 years. I almost cry when it's like, I said, God, there's no way. How are we going to pay for this? God said, go forward. And the waters started to part. And I went forward. I resigned from my job, my full-time job. God, I don't know how we're going to do this. And not long after that, I was contacted by people at the First Methodist Church in Dallas, Georgia, that said, hey, we understand you do some music and singing and worship leading. We're looking to start a contemporary service. Can you come help us do that? They still have that service going on today. Helped to start their 9:39 service. I was in a bottom floor of Candler, of an old building after an exam, a part of the building I never went to, and I came upon a piece of paper advertising a job to manage a website for a Christian newspaper, a Methodist newspaper in North Georgia. Happened to use some of the skills that I already had and software that I already knew. So I worked that job for about 5 years. I was in a part of the building I never even went to. God was whispering, go forward, go forward, go forward. Well, you fast forward, he provided a way, he provided a way, he provided a way. I graduated seminary and was preparing to take my first appointment as a pastor in a church, and we were explaining to Ian, our son, he was like 4 at the time, and we were saying, we're going to be leaving the church that you've been to. Your daddy's going to be a pastor at another church, try to go through that process. And from a 4-year-old's mouth, he said something to us that was really strange. We didn't think a whole lot about it at the time. He said, so we're going to the church with the tower? I don't know. We'll see. At the time we were talking to him, I had no idea where that first appointment would be. Here's where that first appointment was. You notice that architectural feature? Our 4-year-old that said, are we going to the church with the tower? When I pulled onto that church property the first time, I stopped the car and just cried. Because what I saw in that tower was something rising up on the horizon of the water, where I had stepped in and said, God, you've said to go forward, and I don't know what this looks like, and I don't understand it, but I'm going to go forward. And God provided, and God provided. Now, when I stepped into the water, I didn't see the tower. I just stepped forward. And eventually, God said, you can see the other shore. I've delivered you all the way, and I've provided for you every step of the way. Go forward. But I can't. It doesn't make sense, God. Go forward. But how are we going to go forward? Trust me. Am I able to provide? Could I split the waters apart for you? What I want you to hear and think about this morning, again, some of you all may have different situations in life that you may be looking at right now and thinking, I just don't know a way. Maybe it's with your kids that are grown and they've taken wayward paths and you're just thinking, I feel like I failed and they're just off track. And maybe God's calling you, make a way. And maybe you're trying to lift them up, pray for them, go forward, even though you can't see the other side. Maybe God's asking you to do something bold at work. Go forward. Maybe God's asking you to heal a relationship and work toward reconciliation and forgiveness. Go forward. There's a part of me every day walking on the campus here that I look at all this mess with the building and I think, oh, what a horrible mistake. And it feels like God says, go forward. It's okay. Go forward. I'll provide. What the people of Israel did when they reached the other side, if you turn the page in your Bible, first thing they did, they didn't go pat Moses on the back. They worshiped. They worshiped. God, you've done it. So in that spirit, the band are going to lead us again in a chorus of a song that we've already sung. Now, some of y'all may think I'm being led, but man, I'm scared. God knows. But will you be enslaved by the fear? As we sing this, would you stand? And I invite you as you sing it, God knows your situation. As you sing it, lift that situation to him as a prayer. God, help me to not be fearful.